Since Donald Trump returned to the White House, one reality has become impossible to ignore. The United States of America are no longer a reliable partner, neither for Ukraine nor for the whole continent of Europe. Because time and time again, the American president threatens Europe with new tariffs, puts political pressure on the continent over Greenland, and allows security papers to circulate in Washington that increasingly frame the European Union not as an ally but as a strategic rival. But nowhere is this shift more dangerous than in US policy towards Ukraine, because at different moments Trump has openly blamed Kyiv and President Volodymyr Zelensky for the war itself, while vital weapons deliveries were suddenly paused, questioned or used as a political leverage. And yet, while the United States is increasingly becoming an unstable and unreliable partner, Ukraine has quietly built strong alternatives inside Europe. And one country in particular has moved into the center of Kyiv's strategy. It's called France. Because Paris is no longer just supplying fighter jets and long-range missiles, France has become one of Ukraine's most important partners in the whole continent of Europe, because they share intelligence, surveillance and strategic decision-making, and this shift could change the balance of power far beyond the battlefield in Ukraine. But why France's role is so critical today for Ukraine, how it weakens both Moscow's and Washington's leverage, and why Paris could become Kyiv's most important ally in the upcoming months, that's exactly what we are going to break down today. Hi, my name is Alexander Kortan. I'm a strategic analyst and media manager from Austria, and I'm also the founder of the German YouTube channel Geopol. And today we want to take a closer look about the French support for Ukraine. And this is important because if we take a closer look at Trump's Ukraine policy, one thing becomes obvious very quickly. Kyiv can no longer depend on the United States. Because Donald Trump, especially together with his special envoy Steve Witkoff, has repeatedly echoed Russian talking points, while Washington has steadily moved away from acting as a true strategic partner for Ukraine. And today every major US weapon system delivered to Ukraine must first be purchased by European countries, often at a premium, because the United States is no longer supplying weapons as part of a shared security effort, but rather selling them as a business transaction. And in practice, this means Washington acts less like an ally and more like an expensive arms dealer. And we're still one that cannot be fully trusted. Because twice already, Trump has frozen weapons deliveries and suspended intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And while the loss of certain weapon system is problematic, it is not the most dangerous part for Ukraine. Because Europe and Ukraine are now capable of producing most conventional weapons themselves, and temporary US delivery stop would not be immediately collapse Ukraine's frontline defenses. So the real danger lies elsewhere. Because until recently, Ukraine depended almost entirely on the United States for strategic intelligence, and that dependency gave Washington enormous leverage over Kyiv. But that leverage is now fading. And we have to be clear, for Trump, intelligence sharing was the most powerful pressure tool over Ukraine, because these US capabilities allowed Ukraine to detect Russian bomber launches in real time, track missile strikes before they happened, and prepare defense long before impacts occur in the cities. And I experienced this personally while traveling to Ukraine in the August of 2025. And long before the first explosions reached Kyiv, warnings came in that Russian Tupolev 95 bombers had taken off and cruise missiles would arrive roughly in an hour. So I and other people in Kyiv had enough time to get themselves into shelter. And we have to be clear about one thing. That time matters, and it saves civilian lives, because it allows air defenses to prepare and it reduces chaos and panic in the Kyiv capital and in other cities. So intelligence sharing is not an abstract concept, it directly determines who lives and who dies. But beyond air defense and warnings, these intelligence inputs also guide strikes against the Russian Federation, against Russian ammunition depots, training grounds and logistic outlets. So we can say they shape the entire operational battlefield as well, and not only the strategic war. And this is exactly why Trump repeatedly threatened to cut off intelligence cooperation with Ukraine. And the message was very simple: do what we want or the information stops. But after Trump's first major escalation in early March 2025, one European country stepped in to neutralize this pressure, and this country is called France. Because already on March 8, 2025, President Emmanuel Macron announced that France would significantly expand intelligence sharing with Ukraine. At that time, many doubted whether Paris could truly fill the gap left by Washington. But today we know the answer, and France has kept its word and even more than that. Because by early 2026, French officials confirmed that Paris was now providing the majority of intelligence data Ukraine relies on, effectively replacing the United States as Kyiv's main intelligence partner. And this shift cannot be overstated, because for Ukraine it means reliable, predictable support in its defense against Russia, but strategically it does something even more important, and it completely changes Ukraine's position in peace negotiations. Because in the past, Washington tried to use intelligence as a weapon to push Kyiv into an unfavorable deal, and Trump openly accused Ukraine of starting the war, questions its leadership, and framed Russian demands as reasonable. And all of this was designed to force Kyiv into concessions it didn't want to make. And even though those efforts did not fully succeed for the United States, the pressure on Ukraine was constant and severe. But France's involvement now removes that pressure, because Washington can no longer credibly threaten Ukraine by cutting intelligence flows, and Kyiv no longer has to accept dictated peace just to survive. No matter how many pro-Russian proposals Trump, Witkoff or Putin promote in the future, Ukraine is no longer forced to comply. But intelligence is not the only part of the story here, because over the past 3 years, France has repeatedly taken a leading role in military support for Ukraine, and together with the United Kingdom, Paris was among the first to supply long-range cruise missiles for Ukraine. But France has also delivered armored vehicles, artillery systems and Mirage 2000 fighter jets, and its role in shaping Ukraine's future air force may be even more important. Because French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have signed an agreement that will see up to 100 Rafale fighter jets delivered over the coming years to the Ukrainian Air Force. And together with Sweden's Gripen E, these aircrafts will lift Ukraine's Air Force to an entirely new level. And alongside these jets, France is supplying advanced radar systems and modern air defense platforms to Ukraine. And this matters because it further weakens the US leverage on Kyiv. Because with European intelligence, European fighter jets and European air defense systems, Ukraine is no longer structurally dependent on Washington, neither in the air nor on the ground. And the air defense system SAMPT, Europe's most advanced air defense platform, can rival or even surpass US Patriot systems in certain configurations. And while full deployment will take some time for Ukraine, the strategic message is already clear, because Ukraine has alternatives to Washington. And this is why Emmanuel Macron has increasingly positioned himself as a leading voice for Europe in a potential negotiation with Russia. Because the French president has openly stated that if US-led peace efforts fail, Europe must be ready to engage directly with Russia, in close coordination with Ukraine and with full transparency. And this approach is absolutely logical. Because the less influence Washington holds over Ukraine, the less reason the United States should dominate peace talks. And giving Trump too much space in peace negotiation risks diplomatic disaster for Ukraine and Europe. And Europe has a direct security interest in the outcome of this war. And thanks to the French leadership, Europe has now earned its right at the table of negotiations. So the challenge ahead is to actually use this leverage. So in the end we can say France has not just supported Ukraine militarily, it has reshaped the political balance of the war as a whole. And so now I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this topic. How do you assess France's role in the war on Ukraine, and what more should other European countries do to support the Ukrainian war effort? Let me know in the comments, I will enjoy reading them for sure. Otherwise I will end the video here. If you found these videos and the informations helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel Geopol Global. Otherwise, take care, I will see you in the next one.